if you attended part one. Ruby has made a couple of mentions of, oh, this is an extension, this is part two. I'm just going to tell you what that means. You don't have to have watched part one, but Lisa will in a second put a recording to, or the link where you can find out more about part one, just so you have the context, you have the link for future. You don't have to have attended that to make sense of this one, but just so you know, in that first session, we were looking at library perspectives on approaches to open access without author-facing fees, touching on collective action, all types of collective action, diamond open access, transformative agreements. We looked at how these sorts of OA offers and these sorts of requests for support or deals, how they are evaluated by libraries, and various useful links and resources from that conversation, as well as some answers to questions we didn't have the chance to finish in chat in live session. All of that is available at the link that Lisa will be sharing with you. Now, I say some answers to some of the questions because we received so many questions that we sort of on the fly then decided, okay, we probably need to have a part two. We can't answer everything in a written format. And so we grouped some of the questions on different themes. And that's why we're all here today. That's what this part two is about. So it's building on that conversation. And it is, again, this session is totally led by questions we already had, we couldn't get to, and maybe some questions you might have as we go through things live in conversation. So without further ado, I will jump straight into those Q&A because that's what we're here to do, is discuss the questions you most wanted answers to. And so we're going to get into it. We're joined by three speakers who are so patient and generous with their time because they've done their part one, or they've done the webinar that turned out to only be a part one. So we are joined by the three speakers, and you'll read more about them as each of them start to speak. So I'm going to address my first question to you, Sarah. When advocating within the library or within a university, what talking points, what arguments, what language, what methods are you using in favour of charge-free models versus, say, paid access and subscriptions? How do you convince your institution internally that this stuff is worth spending what is quite limited resource on?
Yeah, thanks, Malavika, and hello, everybody. Yeah, I wanted to talk first about this question because it's something that we've been dealing with very actively at my institution, the University of York, for quite a few years now. So we started off supporting, the more fee-free open access models, quite a small scale, and I would say it is still a small scale compared to the other forms of publishing and the agreements that we support. But we are slowly building that. So when we first started, it really was very much because we felt that was an important strategy aligned with our support that we were giving the whole university around open research, supporting open access and so on. And we very much didn't want just to support one flavour of open access. We felt it was important to support open access, emerging models and everything, because that's a really good fit for the different disciplinary studies going on across the university in both teaching and research. We're quite a broad-based university. We have research and teaching going on in practically every subject. So there isn't just a reliance on one type of publisher or model. So first of all, that for us was a very compelling reason. Also thinking around some of the issues that we know there are with publishing at the moment in terms of affordability. That really came to a sharp end for us a couple of years ago. We had, as I explained last time, we had a big budget reduction at my library. And yet nothing else was changing in the university in terms of the shape of the university was still the same. We still had the same number of academic departments. They weren't shrinking that. So we really had to think carefully about how we made our budget go further in order to provide at least some of what everybody wanted. So the main talking points we've been having with very senior stakeholders in the institution have been around that, I guess, the better value for money argument, but more importantly about the bigger issues to do with scholarly publishing, the big some of the systemic problems which are around, dominant publishers, dominant models. When our budget is dwindling, we can either make a choice just to reserve it to spend it on those dominant publishers and models, or we take a stand. And if so, the reduction for us in terms of what we've chosen not to spend as much on has been on the really big deals and the biggest publishers, because as I've said, we have a broad community that we need to support. So that's how we've approached it at York, and we've been having really fruitful discussions. And not everybody shares enthusiasm for what we've done. In fact, quite the opposite. Quite often, the most vocal voices in the room are people who are vehemently advocating for what they need, rather than the community as a whole. But I do think that from a library perspective, we need to be supporting our entire community, not just the needs of a particular discipline or the best funded departments or whatever it may be. We have a responsibility to everybody. So that's how we've approached it at my institution, and it's still a work in progress.
Absolutely. Thanks, Sarah. And when you mention about libraries and the communities that your libraries are supporting, let's flip that now to the author perspective or the faculty perspective, right, across all of your disciplines. How are you, what does that messaging and communication look like with those author and faculty communities to make the most effective use of the programs that you're investing in?
Yeah, it does require a lot of ongoing engagement and communication, and consultation as well. So we reach out to different committees within faculties. We rely on my other colleagues in the library who may have really productive contacts and routes into particular departments as well. So there's a whole mix of conversations going on. What we're also in the process of trying to find out more about is which academics are particularly involved in helping to run journals. So we don't always have that know who's who, which often quite have to do some digging deep into websites and so on, just to try to understand who's editing journals, and therefore which of those journals are Diamond Open Access, for example, who's involved in scholarly societies that produce journals, who might be considering different models. So again, this is a work in progress. We really want to position ourselves as someone people can come to talk to if they've got questions about that, because of the work that they're doing within a journal or within a scholarly society. But it's very much that ongoing engagement and communication piece that we do. We've got people in lots of different roles that reach out to our academics. So it's just trying to get different people in the library up to speed so that they can have those conversations confidently and they understand the messages that we want to convey.
Indeed. Thanks, Sarah. And you mentioned, finding out who the faculty are. And we've had a question, actually, that I know you wanted to speak to Jack. We've had a question about, are you talking to the faculty? Do they know? Are you really serving their needs? That kind of a thing, So the way the question was framed was like, are the universities having open consultations with their researchers about where they want to publish and under what type of agreement? How are you basing these decisions? Is it just on past publication record? And sometimes there may be a bit of a catch-22 with that, right? When you're looking at past publication record only. Or do you have larger scale, more structured consultations with the research communities that you're serving? And how does that piece work? So, Sarah, I don't know if you wanted to come in on any of that, and then I'll pass it over to Jack after that.
So that was around understanding where our authors want to publish, if I got that right.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So yes, we do look at evidence of where past publication has taken place. But as I said, we don't just want to rely on that. So it is also about us, trying to spot who's actively engaged in different societies and so on. We've also been doing some surveys recently to try and get that information out of our academics. We've been holding some focus groups. So yeah, we've formed a scholarly publishing group across the institution now, and we're trying to dig into these issues in much more detail than we've ever been able to surface before. As I say,
Are they engaging? Sorry, Sarah.
Yes, they
Are your
are.
researchers engaging? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
and it's
Good to know.
really interesting. As part of this, we're hearing quite consistently back from many of our academics, not from everybody, but many academics, and in fact, though they may not want to change which journals they publish with at the moment, I would say the majority of them recognize the problems in the system. And I'm hearing more and more the word extractive being mentioned as part of the conversations that we're having around publishing, and why, why there are issues in terms of finances, and it's not widespread. Everybody wants to get involved with helping to support fee-free models, because there's so much that's bound up in the need to publish, as the academics perceive it, in established journals that are credible, that have a certain position and a certain standing within the discipline. So there's that going on, but equally they do know, the other side of their brain knows, that many of these publishers do have practices that they themselves, the academics, are calling out as extractive. So it's an interesting tension, and we're having lots of good discussions at the moment.
Great, thank you. And Jack, thanks for your patience, because I know you wanted to say something about this area as well.
Yeah, and I work with a consortium where it's a national consortium in Ireland, which has 18 members. So we're at a bit of a remove from the end users. And so a kind of that type of consultation would happen best at a local institutional level. So, for example, if we tried free text surveying of academics about the type of content they want, or the type of publications they want to publish in, you can expect that we get a lot of really messy, confusing data back from it. So that doesn't really work at a national level. Instead, what we've done recently is doing a more bibliometric analysis, largely using OpenAlex. So this is the kind of thing that any institution can easily repeat, where we're looking at the authors and the researchers in our member institutions, the kind of journals they're publishing in, the kind of publishers they're working with, to see that kind of a history there. Are there many publishers that we don't have a relationship with, that there seems to be a strong demand with from authors? And even if they haven't published with journals yet, we can also easily see from bibliometric tools who they're citing. So we can kind of make I guess based on that, on what their research interests are, and how much they value certain publishers and certain titles.
Thank you, Jack. And why don't I stay with you for a moment, because another of the questions we've received is around, we talked in part one a little bit about transformative agreements and how they're sort of lifting the fee barrier, if you like, just for affiliated authors, where the institution has an agreement with a publisher. And then, as we talked as well, Sarah's painted this picture of libraries investing in other types of, whether it's open infrastructures or models. So as this shift is playing out, and we're moving from, say, TAs or APCs to other models, other infrastructures, are there any best practices that are informing library users, so i.e. the authors, the faculty themselves, about things like the end dates for TAs? If that's going to move to something else, how would they expect for their, say, article level fee to be covered if a TA is coming to an end? Is that going to pop up another paywall, or how are you managing that communication?
Yeah, well, it's not something I'd be actively involved in. So kind of my consortium would provide information on our website and also provide information to the member libraries. But I suppose from the point of view of, I suppose, selling Diamond or no fee open access to researchers, there can be a communications challenge with open access publishing agreements, where sometimes a deal might be capped and the cap might run out for allowances. Sometimes an agreement might be coming to an end and the next agreement isn't ready yet. But I suppose an assurance that librarians can provide to researchers who are considering submitting to a no-fees journal is that they're going to bypass that headache.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack. And Robin, I know you wanted to come in on this as well.
Hi. Yes. Good morning, or hello. Good, whatever part of the day you are in. I'm in my morning. That's why I have tea. So yeah, I haven't had to do this yet at Iowa State, but I would take a page from all of the best practices for that are well documented about breaking a big deal, a big journal deal. This would be something similar if you're going to break a large transformative agreement with a big commercial publisher, because my assumption would be that that's a lot of potential authors. And so you need to do a lot of communication out broadly because they're popular. And you would also at least you should be able to contact all the authors that have used it already. So there's a playbook already that can be adapted to this.
Thank you. Thanks, Robin. I'm just going to, for a second, I've looked at some of the questions coming in. There is a question that's coming in live, rather than our bank of questions that we already had. One of them is around what kind of discussions do you have with publishers? What do you request from them? And we're sort of going to come into we were planning to go into that sort of territory next. So you were going to move to the section around reaching and supporting the library, so either publishers reaching or supporting the library, right? What advice do you have for what publishers need to know that you need to know, right? So if you want to take that as a broad question in general, but as well, do you have any specific advice for small publishing organizations? Because I'm conscious that there are organizations that are publishers that are very large and have scale and get seats at the table to negotiate with consortia. And then there are small organizations that literally feel invisible, so basically, what do you need to hear from your publishers, and then what advice do you have for those that are very small? Jack, can I come to you on this?
Yeah, well, IReL would regularly engage with a lot of prospective publishers. And I suppose in the initial meeting, learning that the publisher's content is great and that they're nice guys and they've got a nice business model will only get you so far. What can be helping us to inform a decision on a proposal from a publisher, like I said a moment ago, is having an evidence to base a decision on. So are there authors in our institutions publishing with them? Is the content being cited by them? Some fully open access publishers will have access to counter usage data, so you can see it's imperfect data, but it's still useful. How many people in an institution are reading the content? That all helps. And I think that there was a comment somewhere or a question that it can be very challenging for particularly a newer publisher or a very small publisher to get a foot in the door if they don't have that local publishing or citation track history yet. That's a kind of something that's a hard hurdle to cross. But I think what would help is knowing a bit more about the consortium or the institution. So, for example, IReL Consortium, on our website, we have our mission statement and our values and our negotiation principles. And I've received proposals recently from publishers where they made an effort to address point by point how they align with that.
Great, thank you. And a quick word on, are there specific, we dealt with this a little bit in the last session, but in summary, how do you like to hold publishers or publishing offers accountable? What's your route for doing that?
Well, we if I understand the question, it's simply by having a clear understanding in our discussions with the publisher and understanding in writing in a contract with the publisher or supplier about the kind of the responsibilities of each party, and having that as clearly understood as possible.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack. And Sarah, if I come to you next about still with this theme of, publishers reaching the library, right? So how do publishers or infrastructures get to speak to the right people at the library? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I can see how that can be really challenging. And obviously small publishers, small infrastructures will only have a small team. So they don't have a lot of time to to understand who's who in each library, and I can well appreciate that. I think my advice would be work out if you can work out who your most engaged community of academics is and where they are based. So this is for publishers in particular. I think that's a really good place to start, because then you at least have a short list of which libraries affiliated with those universities are the right ones to approach. I think most libraries will have some indication on their website who's who, but equally, look out for who's speaking at different things like this session, but also lots of other ones that have already taken place. If you reach out to somebody, we're really interconnected community in libraries, so we do know a lot of our counterparts at other institutions as well, and we're always very happy to, if you're wanting to know, do we have a contact in a different institution? Don't be shy in asking. That's absolutely fine. I'm always happy to help with things like that. I would also say, when you find your champions in libraries, find the right person, don't be afraid to ask them to help with things like, setting up, if you're wanting to set up a focus group, or you're wanting a small advisory board, just to ask and answer a few questions. These can be very lightweight things. You just round robin emails, for example. Send an email around to your contacts. That's absolutely fine. And most of us are really happy to help you with things like that as well.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And Jack, you have your hand up. Yes, please come in.
Yeah, just to mention a way that we support this in our IReL consortium, what we have coming up in a couple of weeks, which we've done for the last few years, is we have a Diamond OA support program for our members, where the starting event for that is that we, for the one in a couple of weeks, we've got 5 OA publishers or initiatives lined up to present pitches to our members in a webinar. So there's going to be representatives there from 18 organizations. It's something that's a very light commitment for us to organize, to be able to make those kind of introductions, and for publishers to be able to make that pitch. And it has led to institutions kind of taking up support for some initiatives like, say, Open Book Collective, etc., kind of in recent years. And so following on from that, supporting members in a consortium agreement is a bit more work, but at very least having that webinar and allowing those introductions is a low stakes one.
Thank you. Nice initiative. Thanks, Jack, for taking us through that. So can I just ask, what 3 things, if you had to pick 3 things, right, in terms of libraries, Jack, in your case, your member libraries within the IReL consortium, what 3 things do libraries most need from those who are asking for financial support for an OA program without author side fees?
Will I take that?
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. I would say the 3 things would be data, persistence, and patience. So as I mentioned earlier, being able to have some kind of evidence base for showing how kind of a particular publisher is aligned with a particular institution. Persistence, because it takes time to get the attention of decision makers, of busy people. Particularly if staff are moving around in institution and finding the right time of the year to be able to speak to people, at the right time of the budget cycle. And also that, the first stab at something mightn't be successful, but there might be a low level of interest, but you might need to keep going back 2 or 3 years before something happens. That's happened many times with my consortium. You have to wait for the stars to align before things can happen, and similarly, things can happen the other direction as well. We've had other examples of publishers approaching us, and it sounds like it's a long shot at first, but you're talking to the right people at the right time, and then within 3 months, something relatively very quick, there can be an agreement in place.
Sure. Sure, thank you. And since data was your top thing out of the three, Jack, I'm actually going to turn to a question we've had live in this session now, because when we do come to read and publish agreements or transformative agreements, that we know that those kind of deals have so much data associated with it. You've got the read data, you've got the publish data, and the very existence of a read and publish deal does sort of has been shown to skew publication choice. So that could get a little bit self-reinforcing. Are there ways that you are sort of accounting for that, either in your bibliometric analysis or in the way you approach evaluating those kind of publishing deals that come in that don't involve a read and publish, right?
Yeah. Well, just to acknowledge that we are conscious of that those kind of deals will influence author choice. But at the same time, it's that argument, like say if there's a publisher we don't have a relationship and we're not publishing with them, that argument that, oh, they're publishing with Elsevier instead, that'll only get you so far. But we are conscious of that. And I suppose I would acknowledge that read and publish deals aren't the only game in town. What we're very conscious of also is that there's a lot of money being spent on APC-based publishers, which isn't being kind of monitored or controlled by anyone. It's solely driven by author choice and the availability of funding for the APCs. So that's something we're also conscious of.
Sure, great. Well, the picture doesn't get any easier, does it? And also, you talked about budget cycles. Is there a time that libraries like to be approached, at a time in the funding cycle or calendar year? Or is that very different for different regions? How does that look for you, Jack?
For my consortium, anyway, we work on a January-December budget cycle. So the time for, I suppose, blue sky thinking on potential new agreements or having those kind of conversations would be spring to early summer.
Great, thank you. Sarah, how do some of these things look to you in terms of things that you most need to hear from a publisher to support an OA program without fees, but also timing, budget cycles, that sort of thing?
It's a mix of all sorts of things. So yes, we are interested in data, but not to the exclusion of other factors. So very much, we're really interested in the fit with our institution. So what's right for our subjects. There's also an element of, if you call it the vibe, but also maybe it's a fit with our mission and our values that's already been mentioned. Also, I think what we're increasingly looking at when we're thinking of fee-free models is, understanding the governance of the organisations. So how are they approaching that? That's and other opportunities to get involved if we wish to do so. So that's another factor. Timing, it's not, because these things are not just a one-off purchase and they're ongoing. Timing doesn't really matter as much. Certainly in my institution, we're willing to consider these at any point in the year. I know that's not true of everybody, so I wouldn't want to give a false impression. Often people might be wanting to think about things in terms of a calendar year or an academic year. So again, that may vary. I'd also just like to pick up on the question around the data and things being skewed by what you have read and publish agreements for, because I think that's a really astute observation, and I would say absolutely yes. We're very aware of it, and it extends to the way that our academics perceive the value of certain publishers and certain journals as well. So those journals that are part of an agreement, they may see that they get good citations through those agreements because they're open access and they're on that big platform. When we've pulled out of those agreements, even though their citations overall, if you total up what may have been cited on the publisher site, as long as what's been cited on a repository, for example, the green version, the total number of citations may be just as good, but because it's split between the different platforms, our academics don't see it in the same way. So we've had pushback around that. So being able to not just to look at data, one aspect of data, but to think about it in the round, but importantly, think about how you explain that data and how you deal with those sorts of questions and objections coming back at you from the academics is also important.
Totally. And not an easy task,
No.
I can imagine. Thank you, Sarah. Robin, I'm going to move to you next. But before we get into the question I was poised to ask you, was there anything you wanted to add, Robin, about, what you need to hear and timings for receiving offers, if you like?
Yeah, timing is a hard one because for an ongoing subscription, we're here at my university in a July through June fiscal year. So we need time to look at the budget, sometimes you can talk to us at any point in time. If we have the money and everything else lines up, when we actually start the agreement may be fiddled with. But, ditto to the things Jack and Sarah were saying. I'd also like to think we also like to enter into Diamond and subscribe to Open and other no author fee agreements because we look at it as providing more opportunities for publishing. Again, the conversations across campus are, we have the open access. Yes, I will always publish open access no matter who it's with. We have others who are like, I don't, extraction, I don't want to deal with them. So I'll publish with anybody else, whether they're open or not. So there's all sorts of flavors going on. So we're just trying to, like we did in the read-only era, 25 years ago, trying to provide a good mix of journals for reading. Now we're trying to also spread the budget to not only cover the read, but at least some of the publishing aspects to provide, whether we're paying a membership or a subscription or just a plain old Diamond, support, as well as other things. So we're just trying to make a good buffet.
Yes. Thank you, Robin. And what I'm hearing between some of the things you've said and also Sarah and Jack is that values are really important. And I'll just, the blend and the fit with values. And I'll just mention to anybody listening to this that part one, we did cover a lot of these evaluation and fit with values and principles side of things. So that was a part one conversation. But Robin, you mentioned there as part of your answer, you talked about S2O, and I want to ask a question of you about publishers blending in or having as part of their offering author side charges such as page fees that might sit alongside their open access models, right? So for example, you could have a publisher on S2O, but they also have page fees, or you may have something like the Open Book Collective that optionally says to authors, but if you can and you have the funding to give us a book publishing charge, then could you consider giving that to us? What do you make of those sorts of this is my way to call it blended, and I'm saying blended because the idea is not to have an author facing fee, but then sometimes these models do. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I've been learning a lot being a member of the S2O community of practice. Because, at first from a non-publisher librarian point of view, it was just like, well, if the APC thing isn't working out so much, then we want something like Diamond or S2O and no author fees at all, because we don't want that barrier for any author anywhere. But then I learned that so many of the smaller publishing societies have traditionally had multiple revenue streams to try to protect their revenue, to try to distribute it, so that for at least the two examples that I know of, the American Physiological Society and the American Society of Microbiology, I think I got their names
Yes.
right. It's hard with it when we use acronyms all the time.
Yeah.
Even in the read-only era, they had page charges or image charges, as well as the subscription for the libraries. And with the move to S2O, which they wanted to do, those two at least decided to keep the author-facing charges so that they didn't have to increase the library subscription rate to cover that lost revenue. So knowing that, it's like, oh, okay. So you're trying to be easy, you want to keep the libraries so you can make those S2O thresholds that you're setting, but that means the authors will continue a traditional payment. So
Yes.
They describe what they're doing. Sometimes what they don't have on the page that I would like is like, it's always been this way. And the reason we're continuing is so that libraries don't have an increased burden. But
Yes.
once you talk to a few of them, you understand. And then that just wraps into the whole, all right, does that align with your values? But again, I think it's just trying not to be so binary. Well, if they do that, no.
Yeah.
Probably not. There's a reason. Ask them why they do it and find out if it then aligns with your values or not.
So it comes back to that connection, conversation, understanding from both sides,
Yep.
I guess. Yeah. Thank you, Robin. And finally, in this sort of section of the conversation, Sarah, I wanted to ask, one of the questions we had from that we didn't get to last time, would you support APC-based publishers who want to transition to Diamond, and what would you need or want to know in this case?
Okay, well, yeah, absolutely. I certainly would. I would want to hear about what they were planning, and really interested to hear about their rationale for doing that, what the strategy will be, what they're projecting. Again, know more about their mission and their motivations for this is really important. And as I've already mentioned, we'd want to know how they're proposing their governance will work. We'd want to be assured on matters such as transparency and all those kind of things. But yeah, absolutely. And in fact, not for journals, but actually on the book side, I work with our institutional press. We have a small, which is a shared university press. It's fully open access press. For books, we rely currently on book processing charges. And we're actively seeking ways to incorporate Diamond as part of our mix of funding for books. It's in a way, it's more complicated for books. I would suggest that it may be to do that transition for journals. So I'd definitely be sympathetic to this, and I'd want to find out more. And as Robin was just said so eloquently, it shouldn't be a binary. No, I reject to that. I would definitely want to hear more and to understand it, because I'm sure if that's what the intention is, there's very good reasons for it.
Thank you, Sarah. And one question I will take actually I know I said we're moving to the next section, but there are live questions as well. And there is one about green open access. Do you encourage your authors to, put their accepted manuscript in a repository? Do you, encourage green OA? Because the observation that we've had from Ryan is in most cases, there isn't any kind of APC or article development charge or anything for a zero embargo deposit. It can be another barrier-free, paywall-free way to achieve open. What are your thoughts on green?
So yeah, I could quickly answer that, and I'm sure Robin would like to come in as well. So yes, we absolutely do support and encourage green. We have a rights retention policy at my institution. We're after, ideally, no embargo, green. Quite often the reluctance comes from our academics because of their experiences during the publishing submission process. I think we may have touched on this at the last discussion. But yeah, it's not always clear from publisher processes that green is a viable option. But yeah, we actively do encourage that, and in fact, we enable it as part of that whole process.
Thank you, Sarah. Robin, do come in.
Yes, in the U.S., there are things called public land grant universities where the university was founded based on the idea that the research would be translated into actual new inventions, new innovations for the people of the state and the nation and the world. So we had long-term, the library here, we call it a digital repository rather than an institutional repository, but it's well-staffed. They have contacts deep into the academic departments. They track when people are publishing, and they'll contact them and say, do you still have your author manuscript? Let me help you. And they're well-versed in copyright. They're a great group, and the faculty who know them really prize them, and it's a very large and robust repository, and it's a lovely thing.
Good to know. Thank you, Robin. Now we are coming to the section, there's a trio of questions that we had about, the best way I could put it was sort of world regions, the global interconnectivity and governments, right? Jack, what do you see as the role of governments in supporting fee-free, author fee-free open access models, and how should funding flows be organized considering potential government support as well?
Yeah, I suppose that's a live question in Ireland because the IReL consortium is funded by our Department of Research. So there's a close dialogue in place there between the very high level research funders and research policymakers and our consortium. And ongoing, and there is a joint national action plan for open research, which informs IReL's values and mission statement. And the question, so we're building good relationships there. There's work ongoing on joint alignment across institutions on green open access, for example, and on the modeling work ongoing in Ireland on modeling the cost of 100% open access using different OA models, things like that. And that's getting the attention of our funders and government departments. And regarding the funding flows, that's a hugely complex one, which will differ widely between regions. But one thing that would be good to see is a lot of the time the researcher grants are ultimately public money, and they're being used for single APC purchases by the authors for list price APCs without any discounting or negotiation. So I think there is potential for this in Ireland. It might be more complicated in other countries, but there is potential there to, without a downside, take the responsibility for the payments away from authors, take it out of the research grants, and allow institutions, allow consortia to manage the business side of things, get better terms and conditions, get better pricing, and be able to use its commercial leverage for that. And also potential there to use that money, or kind of use that money, or use part of that money to support and encourage diamond and no fees models.
Great, thank you, Jack. And Robin, if I could come to you next, before I get to OMB, because of course it is the 15th of July, and it's probably worth mentioning the proposed changes how grant funding is handled in the US. But before I get to that, is there anything you wanted to say in general about either the role of government in supporting author fee less open access models, or indeed in sort of to try and address also, we have a question about, surely fee-free isn't cost-free, and surely it shouldn't all be down to the library budget. So that kind of mixes in with this conversation we're having here. What do you think, Robin?
I am not the only US librarian who longingly looks at Europe or longingly looks at South America for your national and regional work in open access. The US, with its 50 states, means there's 50 state governments that have different levels of interest in the different sorts of higher education institutions. And then there's the federal government, where most of the federal fund for research comes from. And everything's being tossed up in the air at this point in time. There's been discussions about the indirect funds from the grants that do a lot of funding for libraries being touched, and then that was put aside. And now we have this OMB proposal that changes a whole lot about how research would be funded and approached by the federal government, but that has most of the money for our research and development here. But the parts about the library are kind of worrying, because it talks about that research funds can't be used for subscriptions or for any kind of publication fees or to support infrastructure around publishing. And the questions we have are just long. It's the statements in their proposal, while it's a long document, are always open to interpretation. So some people are reading it and saying, well, this means that even an indirect cost from a grant that goes to the library couldn't be used for a read and publish or a diamond or an S2O. And others are like, I think it means more that the researcher can't, from the grant, pay their own APCs or whatever, but we don't know. So yeah, sure. different groups. The Association for Research Libraries here did a small study on their own and said, if it's the indirect costs that the libraries aren't going to get, how badly are the library budgets going to be dinged? And their estimate is 20 to 30%. So librarians are not sleeping very well right now. So at some point, the IReL response in a blog post that they wrote about their response are going to be shared in the chat. OASPA has weighed in and written a lovely document that lots of publishers have written in, other organizations for libraries and consortia have written in. If they're going to fund the research, they should they should help fund the publication. I mean, it's not only institutions that need to bear the cost, the researcher should, but given that the stuff that affects libraries and publishers most directly is a subset of a much larger document that is fairly anti-science, we're kind of left just hoping Congress holds firm. Because yes, they've continued, even if the White House budget says research funding is going to drastically be decreased, Congress has been ignoring it so far. So we'll see.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what happens in that space. But I think there's been more than 450,000 comments submitted. So there are a lot of opinions out there, a lot of concerns out there around the OMB's proposal. So thanks for giving us the library perspective on some of those, Robin. And Sarah, if I can come to you next about what links you might perceive between efforts around fee-free open access model, author-facing fee-free open access models that are being made by your institution, libraries in Europe and UK, and then linking all of that work with the transition to open and to access to knowledge in the global south. What are your thoughts about that, Sarah?
So I think what I would say is what I find really encouraging about the growth of it's probably a bit early to say an explosion of diamond journals and diamond models and diamond publishers, but it really feels that we're at a point now where there is an awful lot of interest and appetite and lots of work going on to either establish or move to author fee-free models of diamond for short. And I think that's great, but it does mean, and actually what I think is happening, which is what gives me some confidence that this is really going to become more embedded and become even more, I think, an established part of our scholarly infrastructure, is just the interconnectedness of these initiatives. So countries are not doing just this in isolation. They're talking to each other. There are global alliances going on, regional alliances that are coming together. So I really just wanted to highlight the Diamond Open Access Summits that are now taking place. I think there's now been 3. They have the third one was in India last year, or was it earlier this year? I forget. This year, yeah. And I think you were there, weren't you, Malavika?
Yes.
So yeah, you're a better place to talk about this than I am. But it's not just people attending that conference as a result of the conference, a bit like it's happened with the Budapest and Berlin open access initiatives, is that there is work that comes out of them. So there's a roadmap and an action plan. So there is a lot of coordinated effort going on to further diamond across all parts of the world, especially in areas like Africa and South America. So I think Europe is catching up, but I think the European initiatives very much realise that they need to reach out and connect to these other areas of the globe. So that's what I think is really so exciting and I think hopeful about Diamond.
Thank you, Sarah. Do you have a thought about, you talked a little bit about Diamond there. Do you have a thought about, aside from the Diamond movement, the sort of efforts of across any region, right, to open up the content, about how it enables global access, right? So whether it's an initiative in the global south where they've got a diamond network of content that can be accessed anywhere, or whatever it happens to be, because this in a way kind of links right back, I guess, to the original aims of the open access movement to start with, right?
Yeah, and again, it's a really important part of how we ought to be talking about open access within our institutions, and lots of these discussions do take place about how we position open access and the rationale for it, and linking it explicitly to our universities' missions. So many of our universities will have partnerships in other regions in the world, and will be explicitly committed to having sort of public missions, internationalization, etc. So that the levers that we can pull and those reasons there, I think are, to me, self-evident. And we've really tried to reference those when we have been drawing up, for example, and again, I mentioned this last time, a regional statement in the north of the UK, which is supporting sustainable and equitable scholarly publishing, for example. So yeah, it is a real feature of, I think, part of the idea of our universities and what we're about, that we just need to make sure we do mention in all the right places in all the right ears, but I think it's important.
Thank you, Sarah. And Robin and Jack, do you have any, we're coming up to the top of the hour, do you have any closing reflections or thoughts? You've been through two hours of conversation on these topics with me. What are your closing thoughts? Robin, did you want to go first?
Sure. Let's see. Sorry, too many buttons. Okay. Malavika scared me 2 days ago when she said, can each of you create like a short and punchy summary? And I was like, punchy? So supporting and publishing open journals with no author-facing fees is an extremely important part of all the work that's being done to create this open research ecosystem that we've been talking about for these 2 sessions. It's a great step. It's useful. It's necessary. We need to do this work. It is a piece of the larger research ecosystem that's being put together by all of the publishers of different sizes and shapes, and libraries and research funding units and researchers and governments. Okay, so it's a big multi-stakeholder globe kind of thing that we're working on. I just hope that as open-ended as this conversation has been, that you've found something useful to take back to your place of work and your colleagues, and maybe think about things slightly differently or have some new information at your fingertips. That was my biggest goal here.
Thank you, Robin. And Jack, anything finally from you?
I suppose my closing thoughts are, I suppose, kind of more of an open question, which I'm not going to try and answer myself, but I suppose for a kind of a thought experiment for people to reflect on is, how big will Diamond get? How big will we let it get? Yeah, in Ireland, at least anyway, the number of authors who publish in Diamond journals, it's a relatively small slice of the pie. And what are our ambitions with that? In the next 15 years, will it be a substantial slice of the pie nationally or globally in terms of the volume of content that's published? Or will it, or more pragmatically and on a lower scale, will it be a well-established and well-sustained, but a relatively small slice of the pie? And for all of us, there's so many, I suppose, different pulls in different directions, even kind of in our own jobs, and before we even look at the complex picture globally. But I suppose it's been encouraging today hearing the positive work that's been done from Sarah and Robin and others to at a local level be part of that movement and part of that effort to push things in the right direction.
Thank you, Jack. Well, we are at the top of the hour. I could go on,